Thank you for joining us today. I'm Anna Peters at College Recruiter, where we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career. And I'm excited to bring you today's topic. Stephen Rothberg, president and founder of College Recruiter, will be presenting about redefining the role of the college and university relations recruiter. Stephen draws his insight from working very closely with, for 27 years now with our customers who are primarily Fortune 1000 companies and federal government agencies who advertise their entry level, their internship, seasonal, and part-time jobs with us to help them hire students and recent grads from 1 year, 2 year, 4 year colleges and universities. So before we get started very quickly, if you are interested in being notified of other webcasts, for example, next week, Stephen will be doing another webcast presenting on engaging Gen Z. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/user/college recruiter. And you'll be notified of those webcasts and other videos that we post. So with that, Stephen, I'll give you the floor.
Thanks so much, Anna. I think they used to say in Chicago, click subscribe and click subscribe often, or maybe it was something about voting. But in any case, really appreciate the intro. We've got a ton of info to cover in today's presentation. So my apologies in advance if I speak quickly. Definitely grab a paper and pen or pencil to write stuff down. At the end of the session, Anna's going to provide to you a URL or a web page address where for next week's presentation on Gen Z. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, about the presentation, about College Recruiter, whether spring is a couple of weeks away or a couple of months away, then definitely feel free to call, email, text, chat, whatever. My email address for most HR talent acquisition people, that seems to be the preferred way of communicating, my email is Steven, Steven, at collegerecruiter.com. So really, to get into the meat of the presentation, advertising for jobs is something in reaching out to candidates through social media, through networking, employee referrals, whatever your sourcing tools. This is something that employers have been doing for a couple hundred years, basically since the start of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution brought electricity, brought steam power to the workplace. And before that, virtually every place of employment was just a solo employee, the owner, maybe his or her spouse, kids, first cousins, that kind of thing. There were very, very few organizations that were larger than just a little family operation. And the reason for that is, again, without power, without energy, electricity, it was really hard to scale anything. With the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden you could have factories, you could have early forms of production lines, and employers needed to all of a sudden go from having 1 or 2 or 3 people working in their facility to maybe 20 or 50 or sometimes even hundreds or thousands. Now, when you need to hire 3 people, there's a good chance you already know all of them. And so there's no advertising or any real outreach that you need to be doing. But if you need to start hiring dozens, hundreds, or thousands, it's very unlikely that you're going to know enough people that you can just reach out to them directly one-to-one and say, hey, come work for me, or what are you doing next Wednesday afternoon? And so that's when the real sort of modern age of employment, along with sourcing, started. Today, newspapers, pretty much you see the same kinds of ads as you did, in 1885. And the internet came along. This is a screenshot, from Monster Track, which from about 15, 20 years ago, which used to be sort of the de facto college job board for the vast majority of career service offices. But at the end of the day, whether it was Monster Track in 2000, 2001, or newspapers in the 70s, or newspapers in the 1880s, the idea was basically the same: classified ads. Then More recently, last June to be precise, there was a big advancement, or so most of us thought. Google for Jobs went live. Google rolled out 3 big HR-related products last spring. One of them was Google Hire, sorry, which is an applicant tracking system currently targeted at small and medium-sized businesses. The reviews for it have been exceptionally good. It's very tightly integrated with Gmail and their corporate version of Gmail, which is Google Works. And what it basically does is tries to make the job search experience for candidates a lot better. So now, if you were to go to Google and type in something like retail jobs, like this screenshot, you're going to see a very nicely, well-formatted screen. And some of the jobs, as you can see in the screen on the left, some of them are going to be coming from job boards, so like Snag a Job, like LinkedIn, like Career Builder, College Recruiter shows up in those as well. And some of them, like you see in the screenshot in the middle, are actually going to come directly from the employer's site. The second one down is from Ross Stores, and Google picked up that job directly from Ross. How do you get your jobs in directly rather than through a job board partner like a College Recruiter or LinkedIn or Indeed? You make sure that your applicant tracking system is friendly to the candidate. And then when the candidate clicks on that Ross Stores link, then they're taken right to your ATS, or if it's coming from a job board, they're going to go to the job board page. But again, it's still advertising. And so has it really advanced? Now, what I like to think of when it comes to employment are the actual changes that we're seeing in the marketplace. And fortunately, we don't see scenes like this too much anymore, with the adoring typist or secretary, looking at her boss like, gosh, golly, I'm so glad to be in your presence. I think we've hopefully all moved well beyond that. But career service offices, some of them really haven't. And I'm not talking about the sexist part of it, but I'm just talking about the way that they did business back in 1958 for some of those career service offices. It's not all that different than how they're doing business in 2018. You can walk into, especially some of the smaller schools, the ones that aren't as well funded, and you see scenes like this. Now, this might be a bit of an exaggeration because you don't see too many chalkboards, but this is an actual current screenshot. This is still something that you see when you walk into college career service offices. If you ever wondered where the phrase job posting came from, this is where it came from. You actually, if you walk into some career service offices on college campuses, you actually see paper tacked up to cork boards or other boards where jobs are literally posted up. If you're a student and you see a job that is of interest to you, it'd be pretty tempting not to take that sheet and rip it down. And now that job posting has reached one person and one person only. It's an incredibly inefficient way of recruiting, as are career fairs. A lot of schools are really, really proud of the number of candidates, the number of employers that they pull out to career fairs. More is better. But if you're a candidate wandering around, if you're an employer with all of these people in the room, and you really start to dig into the numbers with employers, very, very few of them will end up hiring more than 1 or 2 people from a career fair. And it might take them a day of travel to get there, maybe an hour or 2 to set up their booth. They're at the career fair all day, and then a day of travel to get back. That's 3 days of staff time, plus any costs, travel, the actual career fair expense, the hotel, the meals, etc. And you sometimes even see with career fairs just horrible, horrific experiences like this, where you have literally thousands of students and recent grads all crammed into a room. And at the very bottom of the screen, you can see the tiny little interview rooms that they might be forced into. This is not something that we want to be proud of. Now, a more normal kind of an environment might look like this, where you've got a candidate faced off against 2 or sometimes 3 people on the employer side, maybe 1 or 2 recruiters, 1 or 2 hiring managers, and you've got 20 minutes. Dr. John Sullivan of University of California, San Francisco has published a lot in his scientific recruiting writings and research from his research. that that there's actually really no correlation between how well a candidate interviews and how well they perform on the job. We all tend to feel comfortable with that face-to-face. We all think that we're good judges of character, and if we look someone in the eye, that we somehow know if they're a good person, if they're going to work well in the job. You know, and maybe there's some truth to that. If you're looking for a sales position and you can't talk yourself out of a wet paper bag, then that's probably not a good sign. But if you're an electrical engineer and you're not good at interviewing, does that make you a bad electrical engineer? I don't think so. Another problem with career fairs, on-campus recruiting, kind of going school to school to school, is just the awful experiences that we all have had with travel. Those who don't travel much for work look at those who do with envy, in some cases anyway. The reality is business travel is not glamorous. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of hours, and a lot of it is very unpleasant. There has to be a better way. Some people, or puppets, will say that it matters a lot in terms of how big your organization is. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. An organization with, say, 10 people that's looking to hire one paid intern for the summer, their university recruiting program, if you can call it that, is likely to be very informal, very ad hoc, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're not recruiting at scale, you can be much more flexible. You can tailor your program to the needs that week to that candidate. But if you're like a lot of our Fortune 1000 companies and federal government agency customers that hire dozens, hundreds, thousands, then the size of the organization and the size of that hiring need is going to require you to really change how you handle that, the recruitment, the interviewing if there is, the onboarding, how you're managing those people, hopefully extending offers to interns that will then convert them into permanent full-time employees or new grads upon graduation. The bigger the organization, generally, the bigger the hiring need. The bigger the hiring need, the more formalized your program, and also the opportunity to get into some of what I'll describe a little bit later, which is a less siloed approach. So if you need just a few new people, your organization is going to hire in a very different way than if you need to start hiring dozens, hundreds, or thousands. This presentation is primarily geared more to that latter group because there's more on-campus interviewing, more hiring of students and recent grads by organizations that hire a lot than just by organizations that hire one or two here and there. So what do I mean by a siloed or approach to campus recruiting? A siloed approach to campus recruiting is what organizations did way back in 1958, if you remember that slide of the adoring secretary. It's just something that is stuck with a lot of organizations, the siloed approach, and there's really no good reason for it anymore. Rather than treating each school separately, think of it from the perspective of your organization's recruiting needs are driven by your organization, and it shouldn't be driven by the needs and wants of each of the schools. Don't let the tail wag the dog. Why do so many organizations invest so much money, time, staff time? That costs money. Other resources like travel costs, career fairs, wining and dining professors. Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of entrenched interests, and some of them are less than ethical on the employer side and by extension on the campus side. It's amazing to me if you look at where organizations are recruiting, who's going to those campuses to recruit, and when they're going to those campuses, to see just a huge overlap between alums of those schools going to the schools that they graduated from at the same time in the fall as homecoming. Gee, what a coincidence. If your career service office or a professor that you've built a relationship with pops for a couple of homecoming tickets for you, then it's pretty hard for you to say no to going to their school to do on-campus recruiting. But is that ethical to take what I think really amounts to a kickback to go in and recruit on campus? Is it ethical for your organization? Is it in the best interest of your organization? And is it in the best interest of the candidate? If you go to Michigan and sit with 120,000 of your closest friends for homecoming, really, really fun. And it's great that you don't have to pay for that ticket yourself. But is that what you're employed to be doing? You're not employed to be cheering for Big Blue. Well, not most people anyway. You should be there to hire the very best people that you can for your organization long term. And I'm going to talk more about the difference between cost per hire and productivity a little bit later in the presentation. Another thing that a lot of people like to do when they go to on-campus recruiting is the wining and dining with professors. Sure, nice meals are great, glass of wine, that's all fun. But again, does that actually lead to the best hires and the people who stay with you the longest, the people who are the most productive? You get some nice airline mileage, but at the end of the day, what you really need to be looking at is your cost per hire, and even more importantly, what that productivity is. So where is your best return on investment coming from? A lot of organizations will measure their return on investment by cost per hire, but what that does not take into account is there's a huge difference between an employee who's with you for a day versus a year versus 5 years. If I hire someone and they're with College Recruiter for a year, and I hire someone else and they're with College Recruiter for, say, 5 years, which one is more likely to be more productive over the lifetime of their employment? And therefore, where should I be recruiting people? At the place where I find people who are with us for a year and then leave, or at the place where those people are with us for, say, 5 years before they leave? I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. So we should not be treating all candidates, all hires as equal. We should be looking at their productivity. Who's with us the longest? Who ends up producing the most over their long-term employment? And what you find from a small number of organizations, and I'm going to spotlight some that are doing a great job here in just a minute, but what you find, and it blew me away when I first started to hear about this, is that organizations that take that siloed approach, we're recruiting at these 10 schools year after year, or these 4, or these 40. We're only looking for candidates in these majors. That there's actually a very poor correlation between the productivity of those employees and the schools that they went to. And in fact, some organizations, as I'll point out in a minute, have found that there's actually an inverse correlation, meaning that the more that the perceived quality of the school, that the perceived quality of the major, that the more elite the school, the more aligned that major is with your hiring needs, that some organizations are actually finding out that there's an inverse correlation. The better the school, the worse the productivity. And that really goes against conventional wisdom. So who am I talking about? In the UK, Ernst & Young, maybe 3 years ago or so, took a look at their productivity data, not just their cost per hire, but who are our best employees and where did they come from? And astoundingly to me, when I first heard about this, they found that productivity-wise, their best employees did not come from the schools that were perceived as being the best. Actually, the schools that were second-tier, third-tier schools produced employees who were better. Why? Longevity. Employees that go to elite schools tend to leave you faster than employees who go to, say, second or third-tier schools. Want another example? Goldman Sachs. About a year ago at this time, they announced that they had basically abandoned their undergraduate college and university recruiting program in the sense that they're no longer going to be going campus to campus. They're not going to be sending out recruiters and hiring managers to interview on college campuses to generate that undergraduate talent pipeline. Graduate school, MBAs primarily, that's a little bit different. As of this past fall, I believe that they were still doing that, but I think it seems clear to me, or it seems clear to me that the writing is on the wall. They're going to be shifting that as well. Another organization, Amazon. They hire literally hundreds of thousands of people a year. If any organization needs to scale its hiring, it's an organization like Amazon. They absolutely cannot afford to hire people who are less than productive. They look for the employees that are going to be the most productive. And what they found was that a school agnostic approach, in other words, they don't really care that much about what school you went to, that leads to a more productive employee base. And interestingly, it also then leads to a more diverse workplace. And I think we all know this, that there are tons of studies out there that show that the more diverse your workplace, the more productive your employees are. Lockheed Martin is another organization. I was a moderator on a panel at the Talent Blend conference about 2 years ago now. And on my panel was a university recruiter for Lockheed Martin, and he was comparing their actual outcomes data, productivity data for people that they hired on campus versus what they call virtual hires or for their virtual recruiting program, which just really means hiring them through job boards, social media, et cetera. So the people that they hired virtually were about 1/10 of the cost of those that they hired on campus, primarily because the staff time is negligible to hire people online through job boards, social media, et cetera. Whereas the staff time to travel to schools, set up booths, interview rooms, back and forth, wining and dining professors, extremely expensive. But more importantly to me than the cost was the outcome, that the off-campus or virtual hires were also far more productive than those hired on campus. USAA is another organization that has found the same thing. The candidates that they hire virtually are less expensive to hire and far more productive than those that they hire on campus. Diversity, as I was mentioning a minute ago, if all of your employees look the same and they all think the same, you end up with a workplace where you have groupthink and you don't have that diversity of thought. Diversity is more than just the color of your skin. It's more than your gender. It's more than were you a military service person. It's more than are you disabled. It's more than that. It's also about coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And the people who are born into upper middle class and wealthier families are disproportionately represented at the most elite schools. You go to Stanford, you go to MIT, you go to Yale, you go to Harvard, you go to the University of Minnesota, where I went. Just kidding, a little bit on that last one. But you're going to end up with a predominantly Caucasian, upper middle class, and upper class workforce. If you rely heavily on employee referral programs, you're going to end up over time with employees that just are pretty much all the same. And that is going to directly result in you having a less productive workforce. So what's the answer? Shift more of your resources to virtual recruiting, whether it's with job boards like a LinkedIn, an Indeed, a College Recruiter, whether it's with a social media site like Facebook, Twitter, whether it's virtual interviewing with tools like Montage Talent or HireVue. The more that you can engage with candidates at most schools, maybe even all schools, the better off you'll be. You'll save money. You'll have a more productive workforce. So benefits. It is way easier to do that recruiting virtually. You don't have to travel. You don't have to have the planes, trains, and automobiles experience. It's going to be cheaper, and your workforce is going to be more productive, and that's going to improve your ROI. You're going to have less paperwork. You don't have to start filling in forms to go to different college campuses. Every school has its own process, has its own procedure. They have different pricing. All of that goes away, or at least to the extent that maybe you cut back on the number of schools as you're shifting. The time to hire is a huge benefit on the virtual side. If you get handed a rec today by a hiring manager who she needs like 8 people in the next 4 weeks, do you think you can do that by going on campus? It'll take you 4 weeks just to arrange for dates on campus. And with it being, let's see, March 13th, if you were to try to go on campus 4 weeks from now in April, good luck with that. Most of the students are either in finals at that point or approaching finals. It's too late. So then what do? You wait till next fall? That doesn't work either. We already talked about diversity, and we talked a fair amount about improving productivity, which is what really appeals to me. So Anna, appreciate the introduction. And if it works for you, if you could let people know where they can get more information on our Gen Z webcast next week, and just kind of close things out before the end of the half hour, that would be awesome.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. Next week, Stephen will be presenting another webcast, and I'm going to give you that URL, so grab a pen. He'll talk about new strategies to engage with Gen Z and other modern candidates. So join us at the same time next Tuesday, 12:30 Eastern, by going to www.collegerecruiter.com/recruiting-gen-z-webcast. We can also give that to you if you want to reach out to us. You can reach Stephen, like he said, with questions related to entry-level recruiting or really anything for that matter at Stephen, STEVEN, at collegerecruiter.com. And we can also notify you of our upcoming webcasts and our video interviews. We do a lot of interviews of leaders in HR and TA across the country by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And you can do that at youtube.com/user/collegerecruiter. At College Recruiter, we believe that every student and recent grad deserves a great career, and we love working with employers who share that belief. Our employer customers are primarily Fortune 1000 companies and federal government agencies who advertise their part-time, internship, seasonal, and other entry-level jobs with us to help them hire students and grads from 1-year, 2-year, and 4-year colleges and universities. So thank you again for joining us. We hope we see you next week, and have a great day.